Okay, welcome. Today is September 17th. We're going to review as part of, as you can see on the course outline for September 17th, we're going to review further into Black Aperture, Matt Rasmussen's Walt Whitman award-winning collection of poetry about his brother killing himself by shooting himself, and then, of course, the throes of having to deal with the aftermath of his brother, his death, his family, and focusing in the lens of his family and his anguish uh, in his brother's untimely death. Okay, uh, real quick, I wanted to cover this lecture, how it's going to unfold with regard to a timeline. So I re-recorded the beginning of this lecture, what you're listening to now, but when we get to the next slide and all the slides in the middle are from another class, another English 235 class in the summer. So disregard any due dates that say May or June, um, and just remember when we get to the very last part of this lecture, it'll be me pre-record or re-recording again, so that when I pose questions as usual, email me if you have any questions. That's going to be now, right? That's going to be today's date present. I would have re-recorded it. All right, so today I wanted to look at and also I wanted to I'll review this later at the last slide, but September 22nd, next class, Thursday, sorry, Tuesday, students, or you're going to comment on an open-ended question via Blackboard. I'll post a question in Blackboard about Black Aperture, something that we've covered. Uh, and then you're going to go in and write, say, a paragraph on it. Nothing more than a paragraph or two really is required. And I'll email you instructions on that, on how to, step by step, how to go in there and do that um, in Blackboard. Okay, so today I wanted to look at three poems from Black Aperture. Chekhov's Gun, Monet as a Verb, and Reverse Suicide, all of which demonstrate some appeal in terms of what is called postmodern writing or postmodern literature. Some of you who've taken my class in the past, either 203 or other classes, will be familiar with this concept, the idea of the postmodern stroke within literature. Let's go over some various tenets of postmodernism so we can have sort of groundwork of what it actually means. So postmodern writing can be defined in a number of ways, but and, and even we're in an era where we have what's called post-postmodern literature, post-postmodern writing, post-postmodern artistic movements, post-postmodern modern architecture, post-postmodern art. But here, they typically borrow from some level of these four tenets. The first one is pastiche. It means to copy or imitate the style of another work, artist, or authors in order to celebrate or pay homage to it. Parody would sort of be the opposite. It's still copying and imitating the style, let's focus on the word style, of other works, artists, or authors in order to create some comic effect. So it's sort of making fun or poking fun at it. Think of SNL, Saturday Night Live, right? Where they make fun of President Trump or any number of pop culture characters. Number three is calque, to copy or imitate a word or phrase from another language. And number four, grand narratives, or what are called meta-narratives. Postmodernism seeks to obliterate these sweeping, overarching narratives that attempt to explain a particular historical experience or culture. So grand narratives, in recent decades, the concept of meta or grand narratives has come under fire because it's argued that such sweeping statements about art, literature, uh, cultural histories, etc., tend to leave out much more than they hold in. So, in the obliteration of grand narratives or meta narratives, the focus of art in this class's case, poetry, turns away from large, sweeping uh, statements of people, but instead seeks to focus on the individual. Uh, this is not a foreign concept to us in Western society. That concept is part and parcel, in fact, with Western philosophy, where we proffer the rights and expressions of the individual over the totality of the group. So think about these concepts as we read these four poems um, today, and think about how they apply. And I'm going to help you sort of tease out how they apply as well. All right, so one of the artists from the 19th century was Marcel Duchamp, a French artist. As we can see here, famed, even infamous French artist Marcel Duchamp created art and meaning by parodying prior artifacts. The first, titled LHOOQ, is of course Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, except for he put a mustache on it. We could see where he's entering the phase of parody by putting the mustache on it. The second title, Fountain, is borrowed from the everyday artifact of a urinal. Duchamp called this type of art ready-made, where you just find an artifact and give it greater meaning by doing something with it. But they're all certainly, like we're going to see with Black Aperture, strokes of postmodernity. In this way, it's important to remember too, by any artist utilizing pastiche, parody, or calque, they're attempting to access some artifact from the past in order to bring already built-in meaning to their present work. With Duchamp's work, we have the ability to access all the artistic as well as historical meaning that comes to mind with Da Vinci's Mona Lisa, a highly revered painting that is made here to look silly, really, with a mustache. The urinal, that sort of ubiquitous pillar of any society whereby refuse is funneled away from us in order to maintain hygiene, is set on its side and given the name fountain in order to implore its onlooker to sip from it. Great conflict of tension that exists with that one. Both of them, really. You have this very famous painting, highly respected, supposed to be sort of Da Vinci's opus, and Duchamp takes and borrows from it that image, right? This artifact from the past that already has built-in meaning with his reverence, and he puts a mustache on it to give it new meaning. Same thing with the urinal, right? Just flipping it on its side, you can see that it's just sitting on a pillar, really. And so I think we need to think about this idea. Let's take a look at how Matt Rasmussen's poetry is borrowing, similar to Duchamp, from artifacts from the past in order to infuse new meaning. Okay, so let's take a look at these poems. I think I said we're looking at four today, but it's actually three. In a prior slide, I said four, I believe. So Chekhov's gun. Let's go ahead and read it aloud. As we can see here, as was with or per Rasmussen's aesthetic, his personal aesthetic, how he likes to write poetry, at least within Black Aperture, this collection is with couplets and syllabic. So let's take a look at these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 couplets. Chekhov's gun. Nothing ever absolutely has to happen. The gun doesn't have to be fired. When our hero sits on the edge of his bed contemplating the pistol on his nightstand, you have to believe he might not use it. Then the theater is sunk in blackness. The audience is a log waiting to be split open. The faint scuff of feet. Objects are picked up, shuffled away. Other things are put down. Based on the hushed sounds, you guess a bed, some walls, a dresser. You feel everything shift. You sense yourself being picked up, set down. A cone of light cracks overhead. The audience's eyes flicker toward you like droplets of water. Okay, so Chekhov's gun, sometimes referred to as Chekhov's rifle, was a dramatic principle that states that every element of story must be necessary, and irrelevant elements should be removed. Elements should not appear to make false promises by never coming into play. Chekhov is noted as saying, removing anything that has no relevance to the story, you must remove these things. If you say in the first chapter that there is a rifle hanging on the wall, in the second or third chapter, it absolutely must go off. If it's not going to be fired, it shouldn't be hanging there. So in this way, what does this have to do with postmodernity? What does this have to do with this poem that Rasmussen had written? Maybe here the artifact for the past is Chekhov's dictum about avoiding superfluous details in a story. Rasmussen is using this artifact as a type of pastiche. He's borrowing from the past, an imitation of Chekhov's rule, right, of Chekhov's gun. But why? And to what extent? The past is set in stone, right? His brother isn't coming back within the framework of these poems. He has and will have always pulled that trigger. His brother will, despite what the first couplet tells us. And in the first couplet, we get nothing ever absolutely has to happen. The gun doesn't have to be fired. But with regard to Chekhov's rule or dictum about his gun, it does. He says that there can be nothing superfluous. That if it's put on the stage in the first act, in the second or third act, it has to go off. In this way, Rasmussen is using Chekhov's gun as a way of wanting it to be in the story, on the stage, and still have the hope and option that it won't be used, it won't go off. His brother had a choice despite the gun existing within the family, because if you remember, it was the father's gun. I think this is a very interesting poem. I think he's definitely accessing the past. We know that. It's in that way, it is postmodernism through its use of pastiche. Okay, so here we have what looks and appears to be a very short poem. One, I think, as an artist, as a poet, you have to grapple with the idea of how much meaning can you infuse in such a small space. So let's see what we can get out of this poem. and let's apply it to the postmodern appeal. Monet as a verb. The raindrop that splatters on a blade of grass is no more worshipped than the one that dies, crashing against the zinc lid of a garbage can, or the one after another that Monet'd the city behind the window. Okay, within this poem, and in keeping with Rasmussen's personal aesthetics, as we spoke about before, we get syllabic couplets, meaning the poet is highly concerned with how many syllables he applies to each line. Here we get a great economy of syllables. He is able to access all the built-in meaning made available through the artifact of Monet. What we can only presume is the one and the same as Claude Monet, the famous Impressionist painter, whose most notable works were his paintings and repainting of water lilies. I think he did some 200 throughout his life, some 250 uh, same painting of water lilies, a recasting of this scene of water lilies. The question then becomes why? What meaning is the poet attempting to infuse into the poem by accessing not only Monet, but Monet is a very special thing as a verb, right? I think part of the answer goes back to the collection's title, Black Aperture. We have to constantly remind ourselves of the function the aperture serves in a camera. It allows light to enter the camera just long enough to capture an image frozen in time. Monet, the artist, was highly concerned with the effect of light on the image, a tenet that all Impressionists were concerned with. How does light, especially in plein air light or outdoor light, affect how we view an object? Within this poem, we do get a vivid image that Rasmussen painted for us. Perhaps Rasmussen, in comparing various raindrops and the multitudes of surfaces it will crash into, a blade of grass, zinc lid of a garbage can, even the window, are all, like Monet's water lilies, a recasting of the image over and over again. One could even see the the uh, the raindrops on the window being an homage to the same painting. And by being superimposed over a cityscape, it now has an action. These various speckles of water droplets on the window are the water lilies doing something, superimposed over and obscuring the cityscape in some way. They are now an action, they are now a verb. As we saw with Robert Creeley's poem, the structure of it, I Know a Man, the poet used short, truncated lines and stanzas to create some emotional effect, anxiety or otherwise. Rasmussen is certainly applying this very same technique with Monet as a verb. And in accessing Monet himself, the Impressionist painter, we are getting sort of the borrowing of a style, borrowing of an artifact from the past, and in doing so, entering the postmodern stroke. Okay, the poem is short. My explanation is going to be protracted and drawn out. I'm going to try to make connections, broad connections, and some specific to the past. And that's what postmodernism does the best. It seeks to draw connections and draw lines directly to an artifact from the past that never leads back to an original artifact. It's always always somehow it collapses and dissolves into just a things that are woven within pop culture, within that culture, within society, right? Not necessarily an original artifact. So reverse suicide. Sorry, it's it's hard to read maybe for you. So I'm gonna read it out of the book because I can't read it from the screen, but it's fitted all on there with to keep the great fidelity to its line length and stanza breaks. I had to make it the font that small. Okay, reverse suicide. The guy Dad sold your car to comes back to get his money, leaves the car with filthy rags. We rub it down until it doesn't shine, and wipe your blood into the seams of the seat. Each snowflake stirs before lifting into the sky as I learned you won't be dead. The unsuffering ends when the mess of your head pulls together around a bullet in your mouth. You spit it into Dad's gun before arriving in the driveway while the evening brightens and we pour bag after bag of leaves on the lawn, waiting for them to leap onto the bare branches. Wow. Uh, I think one of the most powerful and vivid poems of this entire collection is this poem, Reverse Suicide. How astonishing are some of these images within this work. So I'm especially moved by the image of his brother spitting the bullet back into the father's gun. And also the end effect, the last couplet, right? We're waiting for the leaves to leap onto the bare branches. What a almost a surreal image to think that in the reversal of time, that these leaves are going to slowly and methodically defy gravity even and wade their way back up through the air, through the ether, and attach themselves back to the branches. These images represent an undoing. If you think about it, in this case, an undoing of death, thrusting the entire scene into reverse in order to undo his brother's ultimate death. We get that with his brother spitting the bullet out, all these things in reverse. This scene, this beautiful scene unfolding in reverse, the undoing of death, of suicide, but also the leaves, right? What is fall? What is autumn? Things are dying. We're entering the realm of winter, and only for it to spring forward again with spring, right? Uh, it is reminiscent of what can be called a reverse scene. We get that with Kurt Vonnegut's most celebrated novel, Slaughterhouse-Five. Uh, a few of you in this class will be familiar with that because we cover it in my English 203 class, and I think you're already seeing connections, whereby we, like Rasmussen's poem, get to see the armaments of war undone. The passage is fairly large. I'll read it aloud to you. Just stick with me. Now, just to give it a quick setup, Kurt Vonnegut wrote a book called Slaughterhouse-Five. It was autobiographical in nature. During his time in the Second World War, he was a prisoner of war in Dresden, Germany. Dresden, Germany was carpet bombed by the American Air Force, and well, at the time would have been the Air Corps and Army Air Corps, and killed upwards, we believe, 50 to 100,000 people. But Kurt Vonnegut rethinks what could happen if all that was in reverse. All the armaments got disassembled and sent back to wherever it is they come from. And it's a beautiful passage, and it has great, I think, postmodern connection with regard to his style to Rasmussen. Rasmussen, I think, unintentionally. I don't think he's doing it intentionally, and I'm going to cover that in a second. What is the intentional versus the unintentional, the known versus the unbeknownst stroke of postmodernism? Here we go. It was a movie about American bombers in the Second World War and the gallant men who flew them. Seen backwards by Billy, he's the main protagonist of the novel, the story went like this. American planes full of holes and wounded men and corpses took off backward from an airfield in England. Over France, a few German fighter planes flew at them backwards, sucked bullets and shell fragments from some of the planes and crewmen. They did the same for wrecked American bombers on the ground, and those planes flew up backwards to join the formation. The formation flew backwards over German city the German city that was in flames. The bombers opened their bomb bay doors, exerted a miraculous magnetism which shrunk the fires, gathered them into cylindrical steel containers, and lifted the containers to the bellies of the planes. The containers were stored neatly in racks. The Germans below had miraculous devices of their own, which were long steel tubes. They used them to suck more fragments from the crewmen and planes. But there were still a few wounded Americans, though, and some of the bombers were in bad repair. Over France, though, German fighters came up again, made everything and everybody good as new. When the bombers got back to their base, the steel cylinders were taken from the racks and shipped back to the United States of America, where factories were operating night and day, dismantling the cylinders, separating the dangerous contents into minerals. Touchingly, it was mainly women who did this work. The minerals were then shipped to specialists in remote areas. It was their business to put them to the ground, to hide them cleverly so they would never hurt anybody ever again. The American flyers turned in their uniforms, became high school kids, and Hitler turned into a baby, Billy Pilgrim supposed. That wasn't in the movie. Billy was extrapolating. Everybody turned into a baby. All of humanity, with exception, conspired biologically to produce two perfect people named Adam and Eve, he supposed. Okay, so that's the end of the quote from Slaughterhouse-Five. Beautiful. An undoing of these armaments, destructive armaments of war. Kurt Vonnegut believing that maybe, this surreal image of this dismantling will do some service with regard to the novel and its themes of being anti-war. Was Rasmussen intentionally borrowing or imitating Vonnegut's scene of reversal? Probably not. But the postmodern stroke in this imitating another artist or artifact style doesn't necessarily have to be intentional. It's already part of the culture. Either way, Rasmussen is borrowing, though, known or beknownst, from a literary tradition spearheaded by Vonnegut in his famous anti-war novel. These techniques, Vonnegut's style, surely it wasn't pure invention on his part or pure synthesis. He would have borrowed from someone else, maybe intentional or unintentional, but he was entering the postmodern stroke as well. And Rasmussen, like Vonnegut, was borrowing, right? Using this pastiche, borrowing of a style in this reverse dismantling, this reverse undoing. Okay, that was quick. Any questions? As always, please be sure to email me if you have any questions with regard to what we've covered so far in the class as a whole or just today. Um, think about it too as you're approaching, as we come closer, ever closer to the first essay being due. And just looking at my schedule, I see that the short essay number one is due September 29th. So start to really think about if you want to apply sort of the postmodern stroke with regard to the topic, the thesis statement of your essay, right? How you want that to look. If you even want to talk about that, you can easily, and we have many essays I would say have this approach to all these manuscripts that we're going to read this semester, is that they're just look at the through the lens of all the elements of poetry document that I sent you. They would, so you look at Matt Rasmussen, or pick out a couple poems like I did today, and then I would just sort of write about. I believe that Matt Rasmussen deliberately infuses imagery, dark imagery, to create a dark theme or tone within his poetry, to include Chekhov's gun, black or the poem Black Aperture, and Reverse Suicide. And then you would just pull examples from those texts and put them in your essay and explain why, extrapolate why, as to why he would have done that. Uh, Email me if you have any questions or concerns about your topics. Bullet number 2 here, course outline reminder. I'll email instructions on September 22nd. There we go. On how to comment on that day's open-ended question number 1 for Black Aperture. And again, just as a review, it's going to be something we covered. So we would have gone over it. You would have been somewhat familiar with it. You're going to, the best type of open-ended answer for this open-ended question will pull direct quotes from the book, lines from poetry. Don't worry about in the open-ended question to adhere to the Modern Language Association formatting style. I'm not going to grade you on that. I will with the essays, but not with the open-ended questions. Okay, email me if you have any questions, guys. Thanks. Take care. Bye.